Lena had always considered herself a rational person, a lover of books, science, and logic. She thrived in a world where things could be explained. So when she found the antique mirror at the flea market, she was intrigued. Not by any supernatural belief, but by the sheer craftsmanship of the object. The silver frame was intricately detailed, its surface polished to an almost unnerving shine. It was old, very old, perhaps a century or more, but it looked well cared for despite its age. The vendor, an elderly man with a crooked back and an unsettling smile, had been the one to speak first. "It's a special mirror," he said, his voice low and gravelly, as if trying to keep a secret. "Not like the others. You should be careful with it." Lena had smiled, amused at his cryptic tone. People like him always tried to add mystery to ordinary things. "I'll be fine," she said, handing over the money. When she brought the mirror home, it seemed like an innocent addition to her big living room. It fit perfectly against the wall, reflecting the cozy surroundings with a clarity that was almost too perfect. She had no idea how right the old man was. The mirror was special, but not in the way she had imagined. That night, after dinner, Lena sat on her couch, flipping through a book. The mirror was positioned across the room, its gleaming surface drawing her eyes ever so often, though she did her best to focus on the pages in front of her. At one point, she glanced up, and for a split second, she saw something move in the reflection. A dark figure standing just out of frame. She blinked, but it was gone. Nothing in the room had changed. No one else was there. She shook her head, laughing at herself. She must have imagined it. After all, what was the likelihood of a mirror being anything but a simple object of reflection? But over the following days, the oddities started. It was subtle at first, a faint flicker in the mirror's reflection, like a shadow crossing its surface. Lena would sometimes find herself staring at it, transfixed, wondering if she was just exhausted or if there was something more to it. Then one night, as she was about to sleep, the reflection caught her eye once more. This time, she could see her own face, but it wasn't quite her. The reflection seemed off. Her eyes were darker. The expression on her face twisted into something sinister. Her reflection smiled at her, but Lena didn't. Her heart raced, her pulse quickened, and she rushed to turn the light on. But when she looked back into the mirror, her reflection was back to normal. Shaken, but trying to convince herself it was just stress, Lena began to ignore the mirror's strange behavior. But the occurrences grew more frequent. Sometimes, she would wake up in the middle of the night to find the mirror reflecting an empty room, though she knew she hadn't left it that way. Other times, when she walked past the mirror, she could hear whispers, faint voices coming from its depths. The more she tried to ignore it, the more persistent the phenomenon became. Desperately, Lena decided to do some research. What she found horrified her. The mirror was not just a forgotten relic from the past, it was a cursed object, one that had passed through many hands over the centuries, each victim more tragic than the last. It was originally created in the late 1800s by a man named Albert Hensley, a renowned but secretive artisan. The mirror had been crafted with a dark purpose, to trap the souls of the dead and reflect their torment back to the living. Hennessy had used the mirror in dark rituals, offering it as a way to summon the spirits of the deceased for their own twisted experiments. The mirror had claimed dozens of victims, each one drawn to its reflective surface, unable to resist its pull. Those who owned it would fall into despair, haunted by the spirits trapped within the glass until they were driven mad or died under mysterious circumstances. The most chilling part was that once you took possession of the mirror, you couldn't simply get rid of it. It was bound to you, feeding off your fear and despair, growing stronger the more you tried to escape. Lena could feel the weight of the curse growing heavier with each passing day. She tried everything she could think of, burning sage, reciting prayers, even attempting to bury it in the backyard, but nothing worked. The mirror would always find its way back into her home, its surface gleaming with malicious intent. The whispers grew louder, clearer. She would catch glimpses of figures moving in the reflection, twisted, skeletal forms that seemed to beckon her, urging her to join them. Sometimes, she would wake up to find her own reflection staring back at her, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth forming words she did not speak. It was then that Lena realized the mirror wasn't just reflecting her, it was changing her. Each time she gazed into it, her face grew more hollow, her features more drawn. She was losing herself piece by piece, her soul slowly being consumed by the entity that had claimed the mirror. Desperate, Lena reached out to a local priest, hoping he could rid her of the curse. When he arrived at her apartment, he was immediately unsettled by the mirror, though he said nothing. He attempted an exorcism, chanting prayers in Latin, but the mirror resisted, its surface rippling with unnatural energy. The room grew colder, the air thick with malevolent force, and the priest was forced to flee in fear, his face pale with terror. Lena was left alone, unable to trust anyone, unable to find any peace. The mirror, with its endless hunger, had taken everything from her. Her friends, her family, everyone had begun to notice the change. She had become gaunt, pale, and hollow, like a person slowly slipping into madness. Her reflection no longer showed a hint of recognition. It was a twisted, smiling thing that laughed as she cried. In a final, desperate act of defiance, Lena tried to destroy the mirror. She smashed it with a hammer, but the moment the glass shattered, a deafening shriek filled the room, and the pieces began to reassemble themselves. The frame reformed, the glass healed, and the mirror was whole once more, as if nothing had never been touched. And so, Lena understood the truth. There was no escape. The mirror did not just hold the souls of its victims, it was a soul, feeding on those who fell under its influence. It had no intention of letting her go. It would claim her body and soul until she was just another trapped reflection. As Lena stood before the mirror one last time, her reflection smiled back at her, no longer her own. She had become the thing it wanted, its next victim, its next vessel. And with a final breath, Lena stepped forward, reaching out to touch the glass. The mirror shimmered, and then it was done. The reflection was empty.